All right, I think we might get started as this is being recorded. So it can be shared after. There's a follow-up in a follow-up email. It will be sent with the video along with any additional information from today's webinar. This is a GoToWebinar format, so everyone is muted. If you have questions or problems with the webinar, please use the chat feature on the GoTo tool. We will have a question and answer session at the end. I will try and leave about 15 minutes for us to be able to answer any questions people have. Please just add them into the chat as they come up, and Phil will help, my colleague Phil will help moderate those questions at the end, and I will get through as many as I can. I'm really excited today for the Census Bureau's American Community Survey is celebrating its 20th anniversary. So that is what that means is we were able to add 10-year percent changes, as well as a bunch of new indicators, and we will be able to kind of start digging in and exploring those. I want to just start with a little bit of an overview of the American Community Survey. So let me get us to the next slide here. All right. So the American Community Survey is one of many that the Census Bureau provides public data surrounding housing, economics, social and demographic trends. It is a chance to be able to understand broad strokes as well as smaller geographies. And that is one of the kind of the positive things about the American Community Survey is that it allows to show smaller geographies. Now, the differences, and one of the main differences of the American Community Survey comparatively to the decennial survey, is it is an estimate. This means that it is an ongoing survey that's collecting responses every day. So over the course of a 5-year period, it is aggregating all of those responses in order to be able to create estimates that we can then use in analysis. These estimates, as I said, are over the course of 5 years. Thus, in order to compare two periods, the census suggests that we do not compare overlapping time periods. And this is due to the fact that within those time periods, if let's say we're, this newest time frame is 2000 to 2004. As you see, it is already 2026. So there is always a year delay in which they are collating all that data and basically modeling it using, making sure that all of the data is confidential. There's a disclosure avoidance, essentially making sure that people are not identifiable. That is a really crucial piece of demographic data, is we want to be able to understand trends at a small scale all the way down to the community level, but we also want to protect people's privacy. And so not only does the census ensure that there is that confidentiality, we at PolicyMap take it one step further and make sure any estimate that has less than 10 people when it comes to percent changes, we suppress that as well. For these kind of things, community data, it's really crucial that that privacy is protected. As well as this, like I said, we were able to add this percent change because this is a milestone. It being the 20th year anniversary means that we can have 4 comparable periods. So starting from 2005 to 2009, all the way now to 2020 to 2024. So as I said that we said this is 10-year percent changes, it is still 20 years of data because each of these time frames are in 5 segments. Then that when we do 4 non-overlapping periods, that becomes a 20-year period that we do call it a 10-year percent change in the sense of from the end of one year to the beginning of the next. All right, and then in the sense of what the census provides is over 1,200 tables, which is an immense amount of data. We specifically go for the B or C tables, which are detailed tables that provide the most detailed estimates at the greatest level of detail down to the block group. And part of what I want to share is some new data. Each year, the census provides new tables, as well as we like to add new tables. So first, I'm just going to share the tables that the census provided, new tables they provided this year. So they have been doing ancestry tables. So this year, the two new tables are Black or African American populations and white populations ancestry tables. So what that means is any group that identified as one singular race. So in order for it to be easier to distinguish and put into a table, the census distinguishes when they ask someone a race or ethnicity, whether the person identifies as this race alone, as in one single category. This is definitely a flattening of identity, as we know that race is a tapestry as well as ethnicity. There's a lot of nuance. A lot of that nuance does get flattened, but in order for at least some level of disaggregation of data, we do need to be able to create some smaller number of buckets. We reflect the exact buckets of race and ethnicity that the census provides. And then in this case, what they have now been providing is within that singular racial category, they're showing, providing the data of ancestry, heritage. That is kind of a nuanced word, and essentially what it's getting at is what people are writing in when they mark that, let's say they say I am white, and then their ancestry will say they are Afghan, or that, which was a new indicator added this year. This is something they've started doing since 2015, where they provided the American Indian and Alaska Native, Asian population, as well as the Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders. So this is where they were starting to disaggregate those larger racial groups into understanding the more nuanced ancestry. In 2023, they did revamp the American Indian and Alaska Native ancestry tables after reflecting and getting feedback from tribal leaders. So there's no longer going to be historical data with the American Indian and Alaska Native ancestry tables due to the fact that these were reorganized to better reflect the communities in which they are being representative of. Go to the next slide. Here are the new indicators on PolicyMap. So we have nearly 8,000 indicators that we refresh each year. And when we refresh data, we always will show any of the non-overlapping timeframes that we can show and share. So anything, so this, like I said, this is the first year with 4, but we will always do a rolling update of all of those 8,000 indicators. When we do add new indicators that are not necessarily new to census, but new to PolicyMap, we do make a point to add all of the historical data. So while these are the first years that we have added the indicators you see on the slide right now, we did actually add data going all the way back to 2005 to 2009. Thus, there are now even 10-year percent changes for these new indicators. And I will go through, we will be able to, in our live demo after these slides, I'll be able to show you some of these new indicators on the map, which is really the more fun and interesting part. But I just wanted to share some of the themes that we've been trying to capture by adding these new indicators is finding ways to aggregate source fields or aggregate fields that the census is giving us into indicators that can be more actionable. For example, people under 18 or over 65, understanding dependent age populations can be really important in community organizing, providing services to your community. But that is not an indicator that the census is ever going to provide. They will provide just age breakdowns, and we are able to aggregate all of the age breakdowns under 18 as well as over 65 to create a one cohesive indicator that brings that kind of understanding in one single layer. Let's change the slide here. And the last thing I want to talk about before we dive into the map is percent change metrics. So percent change is something that we take a lot of care and thought in order to make sure that these are reliable trends. So I mentioned before that we are suppressing cases that are fewer than 10 households, householders. As you'll see, there are a lot of different universes, or because with 8,000 indicators, we really are covering quite a breadth. The census covering quite a breadth of whether it's an occupied housing unit, a family, non-family unit. There are a lot of different organizations of how they group people in order to bring out these insights. And so we're always making sure that we are protecting identities and suppressing under 10, as well as with geography changes. This is another thing, of course, over the passage of time, there are population influxes or decreases. So the 2020 census was the last major shift in geography, where we want to make sure that if we are calculating percent changes, those are not included if there is a big geographic shift. So our main metric is if the geographical unit has the exact same ID code or GeoID, we will look to see the area and that overlap of area. And if it is greater than 90%, 98%, we will say, okay, we believe that this is at least a comparable geography. And part of that has to do with jagged borders can be a little mutable over time. For example, ZICTAs or zip codes, similar to zip codes, are quite jagged geography boundaries. And sometimes those slight variations don't change enough, are not effective enough in the sense of the population change to suppress an entire trend. So we really take care to make sure that anytime we are comparing across data, that we are looking at those geography shifts and only calculating and presenting on PolicyMap proper the change where it does exist. All right, and now some deeper insights. So as I said, by adding some of these new indicators where we aggregate things, it allows us to ask different questions and dig into different ways of looking at demographics, children and family, income, housing, and such. So one of the new indicators we added was populations of people speaking language other than English at home. And so this is a table that does not have, it has them all disaggregated. So it will show the population of people at home speaking Spanish, Chinese, Mandarin, Japanese, but it won't necessarily show you that one singular value. And we found that if we are bringing all those data together, it makes it easier to understand at a broad strokes. And when you want to drill down, you can. Another new indicator we added was around women who had a recent birth in the last 12 months. And so we were able to disaggregate by age and look at, there's an indicator now for women who between the ages of 15 and 19 who have given birth in the last 12 months. As well as another new and very interesting indicator is around utilities, and being able to now more understand household burdens of high electricity costs. What's really exciting is being able to see some of these things over time. And I want to get us to the map. Ooh, let's get to the map. So to start, I want to share a little bit more about the boundaries, because I think understanding the percent change and the work that went into that will really kind of illuminate when we go and look at those percent changes, that we can be confident in the values that we're looking at. Connecticut is a great example of changes in geography. In 2022, Connecticut is no longer using their 8 counties. They have now 9 planning districts. And so right here, I have highlighted the 2010 census county boundaries, as well as the 2022 county boundaries. As you can see, in 2010, we still were using and even in 2020, we were still using the 8 counties that many of us may have known, kind of Hartford, Toland, things like that. Whereas now it is, for example, Northwest Hills Planning Region. As you can see, there's no trend chart. There's no similar, if I was to look over here, you would see that there's a trend chart going all the way back to 2000. This is because this boundary has been stable, and we have been able to unequivocally say through our analysis that this boundary is, we are able to compare over time. Whereas now with Connecticut's shift from counties to planning regions, we are no longer able to compare apples to apples, since now we have oranges and apples. And thus you will see just that one population. Now, as time goes on and the planning regions are now have been around longer, we will start to see trend charts pop up. For example, another one is looking at the census tracts. So I wanted to show some of the, for example, this is what a trend chart will look is like. Okay, at least from the 2020 census is when there was a shift, as we can see, essentially this census tract split. And so now it's like, at least I can see when this is now comparable over time and be able to see those times. Here's an example of, okay, this is such a small amount. And we were saying, okay, it fell within the 98% the same of area. And we found that that was an okay slight variation within the tract to be able to agree that we can compare this over time. All boundaries are available in the boundary section. So it's a kind of a fun way to be able to understand some of those boundary shifts over time. Another way is just being able to see in the trend chart if there's ever a break in that trend chart. That's often will indicate a boundary shift. It may also indicate a lack of data, but for the most part with census data, it's one of the biggest, it is the biggest demographic data survey, and thus very rarely until we're going into much smaller block groups will we see just any lack of data, or if we're going into very rural areas and it will go below that 10-person threshold. All right, so now I'd love us to dive into some of the new data, the new and exciting data. So as I mentioned, looking at the estimated percent of all people ages 5 and older who speak a language other than English at home. So this can be found in the language menu. We have quite a lot of indicators that the census provides around language. As you see, we have language at spoken at home current. And if you scroll down, you'll see language spoken at home 2015 or earlier. This is due to the fact that they have decreased the amount of languages they provide in the language spoken at home table. So if historical data and understanding a little bit more of the of languages that have a smaller population in which speak them, we still wanted to preserve that data and make it accessible to people. So for example, Gujarati or French Creole, these are languages that are not spoken that widespreadly, but being able to understand specifically if you were interested in Jersey, knowing that this data is out of date, but at least being able to understand the specifics around, let's say, if you were interested in Gujarati. The more current language tables only provide these languages, as you see here. In order to understand, as I said, let's say we wanted to really, we don't care at the beginning, we really want a broad strokes understanding of languages other than English spoken at home without disaggregating between Spanish, Arabic, Chinese. This indicator can really is a good starting point, is a entry point into understanding where perhaps other services need to be provided that extend beyond English. Before PolicyMap, I was working in food banks, and this was often a very big question in understanding what languages are spoken in a community in order to be able to know what materials to provide in what language. And so understanding, kind of digging in deep here, we can see that if we're just going to pick Chicago, we have large populations in Franklin Park, Northland, Norridge. I can also understand that percent change over time. So this is where I was talking about, we now have the option of 5-year and 10-year, which is super exciting. So if we were first to look at the 5-year percent change, Anything that's in the yellow, oranges, and kind of burnt oranges is going to be a negative, so it is going to be a decrease as well. And then when you see the purples, that is showing an increase, with darker purple obviously being a larger increase. So this can be an interesting understanding of where some of the larger increases is, as well as saying, okay, I'm finding a neighborhood here on the near west side that has quite a large 5-year population, but I'm kind of curious over the past 20 years, what has that looked like? And I can switch that. Oh, looks like we have some insufficient data. Well, that often happens too, mostly because this is a track. So then I might move to a slightly larger geography in order to get a better understanding, recognizing that some of the smaller geographies, here, let me lock this in place, may not have the nuance I need. So it looks like Chicago is slightly decreasing. And if I compare that to the 5-year, keep it with the city, we can see that it has not significantly changed over the 5 to 10-year period. So being able to toggle between not only the percent changes, but as well as just going into the historical data can be really, really useful. What's nice about the dropdown is that we have each individual time period. So let's say you are really you saw this 10-year percent change. Let's go back to the city. And you're like, okay, great. We have a, it's decreased by 1%, but what does that mean? What were the counts prior to that? So I can come in here to the number. I can see that Chicago had a little less than 1 million people not speaking non-English at home in 2020 to 2024. And if I was to look now at the comparative time period, that is the 10-year percent change. Look back to city. I can see that it is only that 1%. So there is a little bit of recognizing, with a large city, 1% means, very small amount, whereas we recognize that, in other places, you'll be able to see exactly what that 1% represents. Next, I want us to move on to the indicator about women ages 15 to 19 who had a birth in the past 12 months. I think this is something that has been in the news recently, talking about teenage births and understanding fertility and trends over time. So I'm going to zoom out to the United States so we can kind of get a larger picture of the US. And as we can see, it's quite a checkerboard of with, but, still within less than 5% is the greatest. We can also go into numbers. As we move in, we can get a better sense of counts. Percents give you a proportional understanding compared to the population, but sometimes count is more useful depending on what kind of analysis you want. And if we look at percent change, as we see, this indicator only has 5-year percent change and is rather sparse. And part of that has to do with the fact that there will always be some suppression on the census side as well as our side in order to keep identity safe. But this is also a table that did not exist in 2005 to 2009. So there is data, as I said, the census is always providing new data. And so there are some tables that will not have the 10-year percent change because they have just not existed that long. All right, so not only does PolicyMap, here at PolicyMap, do we add new indicators that the census provides, as well as new indicators that we believe are of interest to people and requested indicators, we also provide predominant. So as you can see, there are a lot of indicators. I mean, across 8,000 indicators, 1,200 tables, it can be overwhelming. The amount of data that the census provides. Thus, we have, I will start with the predominant tenure of all occupied housing units. Tenure is a census term, essentially means, is this an owner-occupied housing unit or a renter-occupied housing unit? So being able to understand owners versus renters. And in here, it's in the homeowners and renters section, there is where you can find the predominant tenure, all, and then by race and ethnicity. And I want to pull out a little bit so we can start I find this map, some of these maps can be very interesting at a national level, whereas others have a lot more nuance when it comes to smaller geographies. For example, predominant tenure, as you can see, the purple is far and away the color dominance on this map. And that is no surprising, as we know, homeownership, especially outside of cities, is more often is the higher predominance. But as we dig in closer into smaller and smaller geographies, we can start to see nuances across communities, where the darker orange is higher proportion of renters and the darker purple is higher proportions of owners. When we disaggregate by race, understanding the predominant tenure of occupied houses within householders who are Black or African American, Chicago is an interesting city to explore, especially when looking at the percent change. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit to the tract level. Give it a minute. So as you can see, when looking at percent change, we can start to see what neighborhoods are changing from owner-occupied to renter-occupied or vice versa. So here we can see that this is now used to be within the householders who are Black or African American. They were predominantly owner-occupied in this census tract, and it has moved more to renters. Some of the blue can help us understand migration of racial groups and allow us to have a little bit more questions to dig into other reasons of, is part of the reason a shift from owner to renter? Is there an increase in apartment buildings being built? Is this, was there a closing of a business? What is causing the movement of people? And so part of this map, I think, is really interesting in order to be able to start asking some of those questions and being able to kind of have a jumping off point of, okay, I can now understand some of the shifts of owner occupation and renter occupation. I think another super interesting indicator that we add to PolicyMap is a percentile rank of median age. So within the age, you can see that we have a lot of options. And this is actually we are really trying to aggregate these ages into useful buckets for everyone who is using PolicyMap, because there can be so many, as we know, life is very long and there are many age brackets. And so understanding the age of a community can be really challenging. Being able to have to click on each single one of these and see what is the percentage of my community that is aged 5 or older or 18 or older. By being able to go to one singular spot, you can kind of get a sense of whether this is a skewing older community or skewing younger community. The eye is a really good, useful thing to get a little bit more information about these indicators. So as you can see, we kind of gave a little bit of hinters because we recognize that percentiles, while incredibly useful, can be a little confusing. And we all fully, even as data people, can get a little backwards in understanding what means something when it's high versus low. And so we have here, generally a higher percentile ranking indicates larger, older population living in that geography, while a lower signifies a slightly younger. And that kind of then here. So as we zoom out, we can recognize that the lighter colors are going to be skewing slightly younger, whereas the darker colors are going to be skewing slightly older. And this can be a useful understanding on the large scale as well as the small scale of what is the age of the population in a region. I also want to point out, I might jump back to this one, is that it can be challenging to know where the data is from. So we wanted to make it very easy for all of our users to know exactly what table we are deriving these indicators from. Now, as I said before, that we do aggregate. So we have this disclaimer here essentially saying that while all these indicators do come from B16007, there isn't necessarily one singular source field that will denote this exact number. You will have to then, similar to what we do, aggregate these indicators in order to create this value. But we do want to always provide the source, so it's always easy to understand where this data is coming from. And then the last piece I wanted to share is how it all comes together. I think this is really crucial when layering and understanding trends over time. So I will go through. We have the first indicator I added to this map is percent occupied housing units with electricity costs of $200 or plus per month. So as I said, this was a new indicator that we added, which I think can be really interesting to understand utilities costs, which is often a much less flexible in a household budget. And we added both the share of households spending $100 or more and $200 or more per month on electricity. The second new indicator that I added to this map is percent of people aged less than 6 years old with both parents working in the labor force. So this can also I wanted to put these indicators together to start showing the constricting and overlapping burdens and constraints that may face a household. So a household with people aged less than 6, we know will require childcare and mounting costs. And so we are also then looking at occupied households with high electricity costs. And I've kind of started to filter these down, so at least 25 within a neighborhood, all that is purple right now is at least 25% or more pay more than $200. More than 50% of households in these communities have children under the age of 6. And the last indicator I added was percent of people in poverty. And that's at least 10% of people within these communities. It is a sobering fact to see so much purple on this map. As we all know, rising utility costs and constricting costs on a household with young children. But let's say I really want to see the communities that are hit hardest, are in most of need of alleviation of childcare and utility costs. I can start to toggle and play around with these metrics here. So I'm going to move this one up to, we want at least 20% of people in the community to be facing poverty. And perhaps we can say 50% or more are facing high electricity costs. This can then start to target in on certain areas. As we can see, the Southeast is most concentrated, has the most concentrated communities that are hit by these three factors converging. As you can dig deeper, you can start to understand as well what these exact percentages are within each of these counties, as well as if, let's say you needed to drill down even deeper, you can move these to be census tracts. It's also a nice feature that there are lots of pop-ups when it comes to the multi-layer maps that will help you layer these and make sure that everything is visible. When you do change geographies, you will have to reset as you may want to change your metrics. So I will just set in, I think we said 50 there, let's say 50 here, and then we'll say 50 here. Oh, whoops, this one, census tracts, isn't, might be this one 20, just to be able to see a little bit more. And that is the really beautiful thing, I think, about this multi-layer map, is being able to layer and understand how these metrics interact, and really gives a larger picture of the trends over time as well. All right, I'm going to jump back to slide here. Oops. And I think this might be a great time to open it up for questions. I'm hoping this all excites you guys in the sense of being able to explore more indicators as well as the trends over time. I think there is a lot to be learned by comparing data from 2005 to 2009 to today. And I'm really excited to hear what interests you all most and what questions you have for me.
All right. I always learn so much when I sit on any sessions with the data team. Again, if you have any questions, please just type them into the control panel of GoToWebinar, and we'll go through some questions as we can. Some are just some really general questions about the ACS, and in particular, I guess the accuracy of the ACS. So Jordan has a question that says, is the ACS a survey, and how do you know it's accurate, and how many people generally respond to the ACS?
Great question. Yes, I think that this is partly why the 5-year estimates have a lot more, I have a lot more confidence in the data from 5-year estimates comparatively to the American Community Survey 1-year estimates. Because they are aggregating over the course of those 5 years, they are, let's see, I think I have some metrics on this. Let me look at my notes. So the American Community Survey does reach about 3.5 million addresses each year and about 15 million households over a 5-year period. Now, we know that the United States has over 300 million people, which is why the decennial takes so much more time and money, but is the one where it is a definitive every single person is being counted. The ACS does have more margin of error due to the fact that it is an estimate, but it is something that it is, I would say, the largest household survey in the United States. And with all of its caveats, often people who are very mobile, unhoused people, people who, college students, things like that, there are people who do fall through the cracks, both of the decennial and the American Community Survey. But there's a lot of work that the Census Bureau tries to use in order to weight responses to represent the full population. They're trying to calculate margins of error for each estimate so that we know the confidence level, and they do flag and suppress when the estimates don't meet reliable thresholds. So any data that is not, that the census is not confident in, will not be provided to us, and we will not provide to you.
Awesome. Yep. I think the ACS was such a key data set to answer a lot of questions in between the decennial census, so it's always been unique. A question from Olivia, just generally about common geographies available from the census, both that we have in PolicyMap and that the census publishes.
Yes, there are so many geographies. I might jump back to the map so we can look at them. I think that can be sometimes easier. Let's just look at total population here. So as you'll see, there's quite a few geographies mentioned in this list. Now, some of these nest into each other very nicely, and you can create custom boundaries. For example, block groups, I like to call them, so it does start smallest at the bottom all the way to the largest. Block groups will always fit nicely inside of census tracts, which always fit perfectly inside of counties, which of course fit inside of states. So there can be a little bit of, when it's looking at the block group, census tract, county, and state, all of those aggregate up to each other. So all of the census tracts in a county are every census tract in a county exists in that singular county. If you add up all of them, you will get the exact number that that county has. When it comes to the odder geographies, or is what we say off spine, that would be then this zip code tabulated areas. The data heads, we like to say ZICTAs because it's way shorter. This is not exactly the same as zip codes. And the best way I find to be able to look at that is, let's see where. So we have zip codes as well as you can see here, the zip code tabulated area. So we make a very clear distinction between that. And let's look at some boundaries to see how those can be very different and the same. I think I might need to make this a little lighter for us to be able to see. So as you can see, this one, I'll zoom in a little bit, maybe make this red. So it's close in the sense of this ZICTA 60636. It's pretty darn close to the zip code, but not exact. Zip codes are owned by the USPS, whereas the ZICTAs are owned by the census, due to the fact that, yes, we know that they're both part of the federal government, but of course they're not exactly the same. So it's not an apples to apples comparison, but there is approximations, and it kind of gives it at least a decent sense. If you know your zip code, you can hopefully see how close it is to the ZICTA and be able to extrapolate from there. When it comes to the last geographies, we have I would say this metro divisions and metro areas. So this is really being able to understand, here, let me zoom out because those are a lot easier to see on the bigger screen. So this is kind of exactly as I said, metro divisions require a much larger population, whereas metro areas do cover the country in a bit wider span. I would say when it comes to geographies, it really depends on the questions you're asking. But what's really nice is that there are kind of much smaller geographies and much larger geographies, depending on the level of detail you're looking in your trends.
Perfect. Oh. All right, we're going to get into some more data-specific questions, if that's good.
That sounds great.
Again, if anybody has any other questions, just type them in there. But one is regarding language spoken at home. And the question is, in first-generation immigration households, is it common for adults to speak a heritage language with each other, but use English with children? Is there a validated way to measure or capture this intergenerational variation?
Great question.
Really good question.
Yeah, I love that. Yes, absolutely. I mean, with some nuance, I would love to be able the data to really answer that question truly specifically, but part of often with the census is figuring out what angle and way you can start building approximates to be able to answer that. So the best is when this table of language spoken at home, it does not mean they don't speak English. And so that is a kind of a separate metric that they have, which is limited English by age. So partly this is the first layer of understanding, okay, we have at least a 2-language household. Now, the level of English then can be started to be extrapolated in the one right below it. So limited English spoken at home. And so now we're being able to understand, okay, we have understanding of people who speak Spanish at home less than very well. So there is a distinction the census makes with just a language spoken at home versus a language spoken at home where English is not spoken very well. And I think that can start to understand a little bit about that, as well as the foreign-born and immigration populations. So the foreign-born is exactly as it says, populations that were not born in the United States. And so then you can start understanding first generation. And then the new piece to that question, I think, could also dig into these ancestry tables. So part of a foreign-born population, I mean, the person has to be foreign-born. That is the definition of that table. A first-generation American, though, they're a first-generation American. They are not a foreign-born citizen. Thus, I would be looking for their representation within the ancestry table. And so let's go with the new indicator they added to the Asian. So basically, estimated percent of people identifying Asian alone. As I said, it has to. We're only looking at people who identify as one singular race, and then of that group who identify as Asian alone, who identifies as Afghan. Within the description, you'll be able to see exactly that table, but also you'll have a link to what exactly does ancestry mean. And so this kind of also gives a little bit more understanding of the nuance around an ethnic origin or descent, roots or heritage, and really trying to bring a bit more nuance to understanding the tapestry of the United States within demographics and recognizing that identity within race and within ethnicity is much more complex than just whether you're foreign-born or not, and what race you identify with. And I hope that at least starts to get at the really interesting question you have, but I agree that it will take a combination of many indicators.
The first generation Vietnamese foreign-born, I'm super excited to see the ancestry data in the tool. Let's see. I think somebody had a question regarding the predominant tenure for African Americans. There was insufficient data in the calculations, and I guess they're trying to get to what would cause insufficient data in that measurement.
Absolutely. So let's go to the percent change, because that's where there's a lot more insufficient data. So part of this specific indicator is we increase the threshold. So basically, if any geography has fewer than 50 occupied housing of householders who identify as Black or African American, we are suppressing that data. So again, making sure that people's identities are secure and safe and non-identifiable is crucial, as well as we don't want to show any data that tells a misleading story. For example, if we are looking at this migrated out, there is margin of error that we want to account for. As I said, this is an estimate. The data from American Community Survey is not the decennial and does not ask all 300 million plus people. So we recognize that there's error within the data. In order to make sure that when we're understanding if a population has migrated in or migrated out, we didn't want to overrepresent those migration patterns. Thus, anytime, let's say there are 30 families that identify as Black or African American in, we'll say, Gove, but we are going to fully suppress that as to zero, just to make sure that we've not identified these families within the community, as well as to make sure that we're not overstating any trends to account for those margins of error. And thus, for the most part, there may be slightly more data when it comes to the non-percent change, due to the fact that we want to be very specific when providing percent change that the data that we are providing is reliable.
Oh, I love these wonky data questions. They are my favorite. I think we have a couple more wonky ones, but if there are any other general questions about what you've seen data-wise, please just plug them in here. We're happy to answer the wonky stuff. This is Magdalen's dream right here. So,
Absolutely.
the one question is, I believe, about the multi-layer maps. One of the layers was parents in the workforce, and their question was, does that include single parents?
This does, yes. So this table here, and honestly, I might even just bring us so you guys can see the underlying table. So what this table is all children, and so we are looking specifically under the age of 6, and so they break it out into both parents in the workforce, father only, mother only, or neither. And we have now aggregated all 3 of these into, because the idea was, if this child is only living with one parent, all of their parents are in the workforce. So the way we wanted to make sure we included all types of households. So thus the all available parents. So any available parent to that child, even if it is just one, is all of that child's parents, and thus is included in this metric.
Awesome. And I think that is it for any other questions. You can wrap it up, and awesome. I always learn so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining me today as let's see if I can, oh, here we go. Get to my thank you slide. Hey, I really appreciate you guys all tuning in. I think the ACS, while all surveys and all things have holes and have room for community surveying, local level community surveying is never going to be replaced by the American Community Survey. It does provide a really useful backbone. It provides a place to start looking and investigating before getting boots on the ground and talking to community members. It really starts to paint a picture of where people are living, how people are living, what are the constraints that they are living with. And I'm really excited that we have now more data and more trends to be able to understand these shifts over time. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Magdalen. Thanks, everyone.